Disney World recently had its city status drawn into question recently because of the company's opposition to a bill passing in the Florida legislature. And we'll ignore the politics of that bill and everything around it, just to mention that, wait, Disney World has its own city. Yes, they have their own fire brigade, their own police force, the right to even make their own nuclear energy. Disney World is a fully incorporated part of, or unincorporated part of, Florida. It's a very interesting tale, but fortunately it's just a weird one-off situation, except no, this is America. Today I'm here in Sinclair, Wyoming. Don't worry, it wasn't built by Sinclair, the petroleum company, but I'm here in Sinclair to talk about the weirdly American case of company towns. And fortunately, today's video sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, does not own their own company town. Do you know what the great thing about Shadow Legends is? Raid Shadow Legends has set the bar high, and now we're never going back. One of the first games to bring a console-like experience to mobile. Bet you didn't know that, but now you do. And one of the great things about Raid is it has over 600 champions now. To tell you about just 2 of these 600 champions, some might say it's too many, I would say it's just the right amount, but 2 that I really like have to be, in my opinion, Royal Guard, who is great for wrecking bosses, does a lot of damage against them, and Venus, who is great for support level things. Her primary purpose is poison, but she's really good at all sorts of debuffs against enemies. And here's the great thing, you don't need to care about those 2 champions, because if you log in right now, you'll get one that's better than either of those, because Delania is actually available if you download Raid Shadow Legends right now for free. One of the most powerful champions the game has ever had, you can get for free just by downloading the game, which you can do, by the way, by clicking the link in the description or using this QR code. Wow, we live in the future, and YouTube ads use QR codes now apparently, but yeah, use this QR code and you can get $40 worth of free stuff, almost $40 worth of free stuff in Raid Shadow Legends. Do you want that? Do you want to get all of this stuff on screen? I bet you might, and so if you do, click the link in the description, use the QR code. Just like this promotion keeps going, the gifts keep coming, because all new players, once you're in-game, just enter promo code MyDelania to get your hands on a ton of silver and 50 XP brews to instantly get your legendary hero Delania up to max level 50. And thank you to Raid for giving me the money. Thank you to Raid for sponsoring this video, and let's get right back into it. Anyway, so one of the oddest things you'll ever learn about is the idea of company towns, which on the surface seem entirely horrific. I mean, have you ever heard of the mining town where they paid not in US dollars, but in their own made-up currency? And in the days before minimum wage laws was perfectly fine to do that, they paid in their own made-up currency, and so that way, instead of giving workers a decrease in salary, they could just increase the the price of the things bought with these goods, because you could only use your company script in the company town. These are the worst, this and the case of towns which restrict you from leaving if you want to work for that company are the horrors of company towns. And truly, if we're being honest, they should be enough to prove the rule. But I wanted to take a slightly different angle on this one and say that even though there are so many horrific things about company towns, the idea is so paternalistic and has actually a lot of very good kind of ideas to it. Because think about it, if you live in a pre-industrial world, let's just say pre-automobile, right? So people don't have easy access to transport. If there isn't a rail line, they can't get to and from somewhere unless it's walking distance or horse and carriage distance. But even then, normal people didn't have horses, right? So you live in a world where you don't have easy access to a place. And so if you build your factory, let's say it's a chocolate factory in the case of Hershey, Pennsylvania, let's say it's a rail car company in the case of Pullman, one of my favorite weird cases, by the way, but let's say it's a theme park in Florida. You want to build this thing, right? But you know that if you build this somewhere that exists right now, you might outgrow that town. You might, if the town has a population of 500, you need 1,000 workers, it's not going to work. You can't, and even if you find a place of 1,000 population, they're not all going to work for you. So instead, the idea is really optimized, and it's you make a town, and anyone who wants to come work for your business, which of course you put in that town, they can get free transport there. They can get free housing even, or maybe subsidized housing. At the very least, you're going to allow them to work there should they really want to. There's a dog in a pickup truck, how adorable. But the idea is simple, right? You get people to where you're going, and again, in the today's world that is a little bit dystopian, like what if your company also owned your housing and also owned your local library and your local church, and the list of things they provide goes on. But in the days before welfare, the welfare state, the welfare world that we lived in, this was welfare capitalism. This was much nicer than the existing deal, where if you got unemployed at a company, if your company went under or anything like that, just tough. find another job or starve in these company towns because they were mostly founded by, let's be honest, quite religious and strongly valued people, let's say, with a lot of money. The towns were some people's ideal of the welfare state, because if you worked in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or fun fact, even though this sounds American, here's the reveal where I mentioned the first company town is actually Bourneville in the UK. A suburb, what is now a suburb of Birmingham, is Bourneville, which is where Cadbury's makes their stuff. That's why there's a Bourneville brand, at least in the UK. And this was founded by Mr. I think he's John Cadbury, but John Cadbury sounds like a fake name. So Mr. John Cadbury, which I don't believe his name, but you know, Mr. John Cadbury, with his very generic 19th century name, decides that his Quaker values are so strong that he wants to provide for even the workers who aren't necessarily working right now. You know, the idea of welfare, the idea of still getting paid even when you're not working because you're just unemployed temporarily. These concepts, the idea of having these public services which are paid for by the company as part of the deal for working there, they're really solid ideas. It's a really great idea that everyone loves right now. Right now we live in an indirect version of this, where instead of the company paying for things directly, instead the company pays the government, and then they pay you money which you have paid to the government, and the government uses that money to buy all of the same things. Again, unemployed, government covers that. For instance, a public park, or this fountain over here, this is paid for by some company, whether directly or indirectly, right? And so yeah, the idea is just the welfare state before welfare state, except even though I mentioned the very clear drawbacks earlier of like, well, what if they pay you in fake money? Well, you live in that town and you've been transported in, they're not going to offer you transport out, right? That's not in their interests. What if there's an industrial decline? In fact, the company towns have spread up all across America because the continent, if we're being honest, it's in this unique situation where there's so much land that belongs to the US, and off that land, most of it wasn't settled 200 years ago. Most of it wasn't even discovered 200 years ago. No person of the US government, at least, had laid eyes on it, and no one could realistically get there. Look at this. This is a fountain. This is paid for by a company, right? Someone did business somewhere, made some money, paid a portion of the profits they made on that, or on the on the sale made of their petrol, or on the there's lots of ways that was paid for. And so yeah, the downsides obviously are that if your stuff is paid for directly, then now they can start to mess with it. And so a great example would be Pullman, which is the people who make the rail cars. They're very luxury rail cars, and they had really great relations with their staff because they made a town, made it really easy to get into. And although they gave preferential treatment if you lived in Pullman, this is a normal thing. They want you to live real close because they just like you that much. And so, yeah, Pullman is a great example of like, it's a great company town, except when there was a big decline in rail, and so a big decline in the sale of these rail cars, what do? Well, they need to cut production. What does cutting production mean when you've got a fixed number of workers that live in your town and have to work for you? Well, of course, you're going to cut employee hours. The amount that every employee makes is going to go down as a result because they're paid on an hourly rate. And so, obviously, you cut their hourly rate and everything's wonderful, except actually they pay their rent and their utilities to you. And so, obviously, you've just had this huge hit to your business in terms of the amount of rail cars you're producing. You need all the income you can get from renting this town you have. Your biggest asset now is this town, and so you keep rent prices the same while bringing employee prices down. In the modern world, think about the horrors of like, inflation's going up. Yeah? I'm sure where you live, rent prices are going up and wages are not going up by the same price. And there's a certain horror, you could say, in seeing that in the open market. But at least you have the option of like, well, I can maybe find another a player that wants to pay me more. If you live in Pullman, no, they want the same rent for you, but despite paying you less to give you that rent. Look, there's a train. How often do trains come through here? I don't know. Pretty cool though. In fact, the whole reason this state basically exists is a railroad, as best I can tell, by the way. So it's cool that we get to see some trains. If you like trains, you come to the right channel, clearly. Anyway, so in the case of many of these towns, it gets really, really dark really quickly when all of this power is consolidated in one place, and these strikes started to wind down company towns. Sure, there are many great examples like the 1940s, but as soon as the welfare state comes along, which is generally in most of the world is the post-World War II, and now the government will cover all these things which used to be only provided by a company, now people start to question like, oh, isn't it actually pretty dystopian being forced to live in a town by your employer, having your housing, having everything in your life managed by one person, and it kind of is. In the same way that if you live in the Western world, you might find it dystopian that the Soviet government will be in control of every aspect of your life, from how much vodka you can buy to, you know, like what job you work and how much you're paid. It's all centrally commanded by one body. There's something a bit horrifying about that to most people. There's something weird about centralization of power, which is why people don't like dictatorships, even though dictatorships can be the best form of government when they work well. People hate dictatorships and they love inefficient democracies. Inefficient democracy is better than a dictatorship, even to me, who can say that it's probably going to be worse, because you know the odds are so on specific, you know, like same with overly powerful police forces, right? Or whatever other example. People find it horrifying when power is concentrated into too few hands. And so in the world where, you know, there is a government that can provide these things and has proven that it can, people start to go, huh, isn't that odd? And the company town mostly starts to die off. In fact, one of the towns that died off, I mean, obviously the vast majority of them did, but if you look at the mining towns in West Virginia, one of the reasons West Virginia is so impoverished today, you could argue, is the fall of folks. Wow, a second train, can't believe it. But one of the towns that fell in this era, I want to mention Hershey again, by the way, because, you know, this is insane to me. I don't know about this. This is well known to people who live in the Northeast. Hershey is the name of a man, John Hershey. They can't all be called John Hershey, or whatever. Mr. Hershey made a town called Hershey in Pennsylvania, and he made a theme park just for his employees, called it Hershey Park. Hershey Park now is inside of Hershey in Pennsylvania, which means that Hershey, the chocolate company, owns a theme park, and they also own the city behind it, which is nuts by itself. But anyway, one of the companies that fell was Paco. This is the Paco Inn. It's the center of a town called Paco in Wyoming. Population about 300, except it doesn't exist anymore. There is no town of Paco anymore, because Paco, being the producers and refiners oil company, was an oil company that set up base here in the middle of Wyoming. Thing is though, in this era of there's a lot of other supply shocks that would hit them too, if we're being honest, but in this era of company towns not being so favored, went under. And so what I think is the funniest, most American thing ever is, do you know this town Paco? It's actually the same town as Sinclair. Sinclair, the petroleum company, which has a dinosaur as their logo, because they think they made their logo when they thought that dinosaur juice was genuinely what oh Christ, I'm in the middle of the road. Sinclair, a company which has a dinosaur as their logo, which just, you know, a little bit of a dinosaur of an oil company, if I say so myself. They took over this town, and so they bought the town. They bought the whole town. They bought the refinery in the same space. All of this is now just another company town, and it's owned by Sinclair. And it sounds like a really bad deal on the surface, right? It sounds like, wait a minute, you're in a company town right now? Yeah, everyone, obviously, there is a local form of government. There is more separation of the politics and the business, although to what extent you could argue, because, you know, towns that have a big employer are going to have a lot of political clout as a result. But there's a separation between the politics and the business. There's a separation of all these things. But the one park in this town owned by Sinclair, get this, I've been looking at their logo all the way through this road trip, is dinosaur themed to the max, by the way. The Sinclair Wyoming Refining Company has, which just, you know, they've made a whole little park complete with slides, swings, even the little bobbers, and I'm going to try to avoid filming people, but, and it's all made to look like dinosaurs because it's Sinclair. It's the dinosaur people. And so yeah, this is the direct version of the thing I was talking about, where Sinclair, big petrol company, makes a lot of money from their huge petroleum refinery, employs the vast majority of the locals on, by the way, below average incomes, not just for Wyoming, but for the whole of the US. I guess I should have said not just for the whole of the US, but for Wyoming. There's actually some fairly wealthy places in this state, by the way, just to mention. But they hire people on below average incomes. They make a lot of money, like, here's their profit last year. Or, you know, maybe last year's a bad example, but, you know, they make a lot of money, and they use that money to fund little dinosaurs, I guess. Ooh, there's a police coming by. If there's an interaction in this video, I think I'll have fun being able to say, like, look at that, there's police, and it's run in the same town by the dinosaur juice people. Dinosaur juice is paying for that police. Dinosaur juice is paying for that park. Dinosaur juice is paying almost everyone who lives in this town. And it's really dark sounding. But again, I would like to, almost everyone who talks about company towns ends it on this like, oh my God, America's horrible. Only in America can this exist. But I want to end by not only mentioning that obviously Cadbury, Bourneville in the UK was a great first example of these, but I also want to mention, I need to mention, I would say, the fact that this is not a exclusively American phenomenon. The police are stopping to let a dog cross the road. See, you know, people say police brutality. Not here in Sinclair, apparently. You know, I'm not going to make that promise just yet. But, not without learning about it. You know, maybe they killed someone last year and that's why they're letting a dog cross the road. Anyway, that about balances out in American political terms, right? Anyway, so the interesting thing to me is this sounds like a terrible dystopian future, but we live in that world already. Again, people like to imagine we don't because there is a separate government to the companies, but companies to some large extent are usually funded, you know, like they make use of infrastructure which is funded by governments. Governments in large part make use of money which comes from businesses. Without businesses who is making money to pay income tax, without businesses who is paying sales tax or VAT or corporation tax. If you look at every single revenue source from the government, with the weird exceptions being things like speeding fines or import duties, which I guess even then it's usually companies importing things, almost every revenue source comes from a company in some way. Even if you don't live in Sinclair and you have a local park, which by the way probably isn't as nice as the one directly bought by the Dinosaur people, because they've got their brand name to maintain on this, but no matter where you live in this dark future where you live in this incredibly dark future where companies with their evil things and their oil producing ways and destroying the planet, or even if it's just, you know, what's the most wholesome company you can think of, they are the ones funding your park, your library, your trains, your everything else. And it's just a fun realization to me when I see a place like this and I see how similar it looks to the non-company towns. But like, actually, yeah, in days past, it feels dystopian by our standards of, yeah, having everything decentralized. There's just a cat over there. Sorry, I know this is a second channel video, and stopping to pet a cat is a third channel video thing. Yeah, that's not a cat that wants to be pet. That is a cat doing everything he can to avoid being pet. No, okay. This is how the video ends. So if you think life is dark and dystopian, just remember cats exist and they love you. Kitty. Meow. Oh. This is a cat that wants to stay just too far away from me. Anyway, I hope you'll enjoy the second channel video. If you want to support dumb road trips through Wyoming, support my Patreon. I'll buy a kebab in the nearest place I can around here. And thank you again to Brave Shadow Legends for supporting this video. I'm gonna leave the cat now. I think he clearly wanted to be pet, right? He was rolling over for me, but he doesn't want my touch. And if you don't want my touch, just remember, not a single Patreon member has been touched by Mr. Toy Cat yet. And that, this is the worst outro for a video. We should ignore this. Thank you for watching. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye. What was that? No, kitty, get out the road.